Those are tonight's top stories, and now I'm heading over to Francis for the number of the day.
Thank you, Bongani. The number of the day, let's bring it up, 25%. What this means is that more people are blowing the whistle on corruption. Corruption Watch has released a report titled "The Time Is Now," which paints a picture of a more emboldened, vocal public, as evidenced, it says, by the 25% increase in the number of reports of corruption last year. And it says that most reports are related to provincial government, followed by national government. But the private sector is not clean. And most Corruption Watch says, happens at the interface between the public and private sectors. So you can think of bribes for tenders. So that's the number of the day, and we won't leave it here to discuss. We're joined by David from the Corruption Watch itself, Executive Director. Thank you for being with us, David Lewis. Let's just clarify that more whistleblowing doesn't mean more corruption necessarily.
No. And, I think the positive take on it is, as you said earlier, it means a public more willing to speak out. And I think that's borne out by a lot of public activity in 2017, which is very comforting to know that South Africans have not accepted this as a sort of way of life.
So this is based on the whole of last year and reports to Corruption Watch itself.
Yeah.
How do we know what the objective picture is about corruption going up or down?
It's very difficult to know, and we often get asked what the rands and cents cost of corruption is. It's really, really difficult to know that. I mean, I think the reports that we get and the volume of reports that we, a small civil society organisation, get, I think tell you that we have a serious problem. I mean, we're quite unusual amongst those organisations fighting against corruption, in the sense that we take very seriously and we focus quite strongly on what is misleadingly called petty corruption, the kind of things that afflict people in their everyday life. We also do large corruption cases. But, when you are travelling in a taxi every morning, or trying to get allocated a house, or lining up to get a prescription filled at a public hospital, then you really know what it's like to live with corruption in almost every interaction that you have with officialdom. And that's what I think our reports demonstrate, and where we've got to start taking corruption really seriously.
And I guess we have a gauge, Transparency International, we're below that 50 mark. SAP no longer going to do sales commissions to anybody below that 50 mark. So we know we're not doing that great.
Yes, and I mean those, that and the Transparency International report are measures of sort of grand corruption, which we engage in a lot. The various investigative journalists teams have engaged in very significantly, and that undoubtedly is serious and makes the news headlines, and we're very concerned about that, and we all should be very concerned about that. But we're also concerned that, as I say, that people in their everyday lives should come across this in almost all of their interactions with officialdom. And it's there where people make up their mind about the quality of their public service, about whether they should take the law into their own hands, whether they should just give up and accept this as a way of life. And so it's particularly gratifying that they're speaking out.
Because the people you're talking about going into a hospital, they are vulnerable people, just relying on services, and they don't have the clout to deal with the grand corruption.
Well, corruption is an abuse of power, and naturally those who want to abuse power seek out those who are most vulnerable: school kids and their parents, refugees and asylum seekers. These are the sick people. These are particularly vulnerable to an abuse of power, sometimes by people who possess very little power, like being a security guard at the gate of the clinic.
So it's interesting, because I think you found an increase in school-related corruption. What's going on there?
Well, we've right from the beginning, we were surprised actually to find a lot of people reporting corruption in the management of schools' resources. And so we started to run a campaign in which we focused quite a lot of attention on that. And there was a real spike in reporting volumes, and there has been to this day. They've increased exponentially. I think, it's partly explained by the fact that people who may not otherwise report corruption, when they see their children suffering the consequences of it, are more inclined to report it than maybe in many other instances. But, it bears out the point that the most vulnerable people, those who rely on school lunches, for example, are the ones who are going to suffer the most direct consequences in their daily lives. I mean, this year, what our reports show, and in fact have shown for a couple of years, is that other big areas are in the provision of healthcare services and the provision of policing services. So this year our public messaging will concentrate on asking people to report experiences of corruption in those areas. And I'll bet you when we are talking this time next year, we'll see a significant spike in increases of corruption there.
Well, I'm glad you've raised the police, because we're running a poll. We're asking people if they feel safe when they see police officers in light of the report today of alleged abuse of a grade 11 pupil. What is your experience of police corruption?
It's very serious. Look, I mean, it's very serious in just about all countries in the world. If you're going to abuse power, it helps to have power. And the police have power, they have armed power, they have arrest powers. And so, predictably, they would land up as the ones who abuse that power most considerably. We are really engaged in the police issue. We engaged in a campaign to appoint a good head of the Hawks, for example, in a transparent manner. We're wanting to engage with the new police minister and the police commissioner. We're doing this with the Institute for Security Studies. And if you're focusing on the police, you should have a look at the work that we've done on the police, and it demands really urgent attention.
So we'll be releasing the results of that poll, possibly get police comment tomorrow. Can you categorically solve the debate now? Who's more corrupt? Public sector, government, private sector?
I think it's a bit of a red herring, that question. The overwhelming majority of instances of corruption, and I'm talking, really the overwhelming majority, happen at the interface between the public and the private. I mean, whether that's a motorist and a traffic officer, or a CEO and a head of a government department. It's at that interface
so
that it happens.
Tango.
Yeah, so it's not public, it's not private. The reason why I think people focus on the public sector to the extent that they do is because we elect public representatives and we appoint public officials precisely to control powerful interest groups like the private sector. And it's when our public officials and our public representatives get into bed with the private sector rather than regulate them and police them and monitor them that we're in really serious trouble, which is what has happened essentially.
I think something we've seen in the private sector that's concerning is a case in point is Imperial, the claims now that people get suspended as soon as they blow the whistle. Are we learning to treat whistleblowers?
Good point. I don't think so. I think these are the heroes of the moment, actually, and there's no combating corruption without whistleblowers, which is why it's so central to our model. And people who would tell you that they support and protect whistleblowers don't often seem to behave as they do when it happens in their own backyard. And I think that's a great pity. I'm watching how some of the major whistleblowers in relation to some of the state-owned enterprises are going to be treated. And, there is still a notion that, don't go and speak out of court. Court in the...
The corporation.
Don't go and hang our dirty laundry out in public. Let us solve it internally. But, there's no requirement that people should do so. And there's every reason often why they don't do so. And we really need to start celebrating whistleblowers rather than suggesting that they are sort of impimpies of some sort or another.
So what's your advice to someone who's sitting on information and there may be a huge cost to speaking up?
Yeah, well, you know, their advice is to come to an organisation like our own. We're not the only ones. I mean, we would certainly guarantee the anonymity of people if that's what they wished.
Do you give advice?
And we give advice, and we try and assist people in dealing with their problems. We do investigations. But, you know, whistleblowing is always going to take a certain amount of sort of moral courage. And we can't disguise that. And so we can appeal to people by saying we will do our damnedest to protect you, but we will also sort of admire you and revere you for your moral courage. And I think, oddly, that's probably a more important sentiment than the legal protection that we or anybody else can offer. It's just respect and a willingness to listen to what you have to say.
All right, very quickly before you go, perhaps the guardian of morals, one of them is the National Prosecuting Authority. You fought and won the case whereby Sean Abraham's ascension to the post was declared invalid, but that's on appeal. What's happening with that case?
I think we should get it's been to the Constitutional Court. It's been argued in the Constitutional Court for confirmation of the High Court's decision. And we should get a ruling any day now, I would imagine. And I'm fairly confident that it will succeed. I mean, Sean Abrams can't carry on as head of the National Prosecuting Authority under any circumstances, but I think that the Constitutional Court will put a seal on that.
All right, thank you very much for your time this evening. That was Executive Director of Corruption Watch, David Lewis. Over to you.